The year was 1847, and the Texas frontier was a place where dreams came to die as often as they came to life. In a small settlement called Cedar Point, 12-year-old Lucy May sat beside two freshly dug graves, her eyes dry but her heart broken beyond repair. The wooden crosses marking her parents' final resting place were simple and rough, just like everything else in this harsh land. The typhoid fever had taken her mother first. Lucy May had watched helplessly as the woman who used to sing lullabies and braid her hair grew weaker each day. Her father followed 3 days later, his strong hands that once lifted her onto his shoulders now cold and still. In less than a week, Lucy May had gone from being a cherished daughter to an orphan with nowhere to go. The other families in Cedar Point gathered after the funeral, their faces serious as they discussed what to do with the girl. Mrs. Henderson, the schoolteacher's wife, shook her head sadly. "We barely have enough food for our own children," she said. Mr. Johnson, who owned the general store, looked uncomfortable. "Times are hard for everyone," he muttered, avoiding Lucy May's eyes. Finally, old Tom Baker spoke up. His voice was gruff but not unkind. "The girl can stay in the old storage shed behind my house. She'll need to work for her keep, though. Can't afford any dead weight around here." The other adults nodded in agreement. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The storage shed was barely big enough for a grown person to stand up straight. It had gaps in the wooden walls that let in cold wind and rain. Lucy May tried to make it feel like home by arranging her few belongings on some old crates. She had her mother's worn quilt, her father's pocket knife, and a small wooden doll her grandfather had carved years ago. That was all she had left of her old life. Her new life was harder than anything she could have imagined. Every morning before dawn, she had to milk Baker's cow and collect eggs from the chickens. The cow was mean and liked to kick, leaving bruises on Lucy May's legs. The chickens were no better, pecking at her hands when she reached for their eggs. After the morning chores, she would help Mrs. Baker with washing clothes and cooking. The woman was stern and quick to point out mistakes. "You're doing it wrong," she would say, snatching the washboard from Lucy May's hands. "Lord knows what your mother taught you, but it wasn't how to be useful." The worst part was mealtime. The Baker family would sit around their table eating hot stew and fresh bread, while Lucy May was given a bowl of thin soup and hard biscuits. She was expected to eat outside even when it was raining or cold. Sometimes there wasn't enough food, and she would go to bed with her stomach growling. The other children in the settlement weren't kind to her either. They whispered behind her back and called her names like Orphan Girl and Charity Case. When she tried to join their games, they would tell her to go away. "We don't play with beggars," one boy said, making the others laugh. As the months passed, Lucy May grew thinner and quieter. Her clothes, which had once fit properly, now hung loose on her small frame. Her hair, which her mother had always kept neat and clean, became tangled and dull. But something else was happening too. She was learning to survive in ways that surprised even herself. When the Baker family forgot to feed her, which happened more often as time went on, Lucy May discovered she could find food in the wild. She learned which berries were safe to eat and which ones would make her sick. She found patches of wild onions and knew how to dig up roots that could fill her empty stomach. She also learned about animals in ways most people never do. When you're hungry and alone, you pay attention to everything around you. She watched how squirrels stored nuts for winter, and how birds found water during dry spells. She noticed that certain animal behaviors meant rain was coming or that danger was near. The creek that ran behind the settlement became her favorite place. When the work was done and she had a few minutes to herself, she would sit by the water and watch the world around her. She saw how deer moved through the forest without making a sound, and how wolves communicated with each other across long distances. Sometimes she would find injured animals near the creek. A bird with a broken wing or a rabbit caught in a trap someone had forgotten. Lucy May would carefully free them and try to help them heal. She had gentle hands and a patient way with frightened creatures. Most of the time, they would recover and return to the wild. The adults in Cedar Point barely noticed these small acts of kindness. They were too busy with their own struggles to pay attention to what an orphan girl was doing by the creek. But Lucy May was developing skills that would serve her well in ways she couldn't imagine. Winter came early that year, bringing snow and bitter cold. The storage shed offered little protection from the weather. Lucy May would wrap herself in her mother's quilt and listen to the wind howling through the gaps in the walls. Some nights were so cold that she couldn't sleep at all. It was during one of these long, cold nights that she made a decision. She couldn't keep living like this. The Baker family made it clear every day that she was unwanted. The other families in the settlement treated her like she was invisible. She was slowly starving and no one seemed to care. She began to plan her escape, not to run away completely, but to find a place where she could live on her own terms. She had learned enough about surviving in the wild to believe she might have a chance. It would be dangerous, but staying where she was felt more dangerous every day. Lucy May started gathering supplies in secret. She took small amounts of food when no one was looking, hiding them in her shed. She practiced making fire with flint and steel, and she studied the land around the settlement, looking for caves or other shelters where she might be able to live. Spring arrived late, but when it finally came, Lucy May felt ready. She had grown stronger during the hard winter, not weaker. The constant hunger had taught her to value every scrap of food. The cold had taught her to appreciate warmth when she found it. Most importantly, the loneliness had taught her to depend on herself. On a warm morning in early April, Lucy May gathered her few belongings and left Cedar Point behind. She didn't tell anyone she was going. There was no one who would have cared enough to stop her or worried enough to come looking for her. She walked toward the creek, following it deeper into the wilderness than she had ever gone before. She didn't know that this decision would lead her to an encounter that would change not just her life, but the lives of many others. All she knew was that she had to keep moving forward one step at a time, trusting in the skills she had learned and the strength she had found within herself. As she disappeared into the forest, the settlement of Cedar Point continued its daily routine. No one noticed that the orphan girl was gone until evening, and by then it was too late to follow her trail. Lucy May had begun a new chapter of her life, one that would be filled with danger, friendship, and discoveries beyond her wildest dreams. 3 weeks had passed since Lucy May left Cedar Point, and she had found a rhythm to her new life in the wilderness. She had discovered a small cave hidden behind a waterfall, about 2 miles upstream from where she used to sit by the creek. The cave was dry and warm, and the sound of falling water helped her sleep at night. Every morning she would wake up and check her simple traps for rabbits or squirrels. She had learned to make these traps by watching how the creek naturally caught floating branches. If she was lucky and caught something, she would have meat for the day. If not, she would rely on the berries, nuts, and roots she had learned to identify. Her clothes were getting worn and dirty, but she had found ways to patch them using strips of bark and plant fibers. Her hair had grown longer and wilder, but she kept it braided to stay out of her way. Most importantly, she was learning to move through the forest like the animals did, quietly and carefully. On this particular morning, the sky was gray and heavy with clouds that promised rain later in the day. Lucy May decided to venture further from her cave than usual. She had eaten the last of her stored berries the night before, and she knew there was a patch of wild blackberries growing near a rocky canyon about an hour's walk away. The berries were ripe and sweet, and Lucy May filled her small cloth bag with as many as she could carry. She also found some wild mint growing near a spring, which would make her water taste better and help settle her stomach when she ate too many berries. As she was preparing to head back to her cave, she heard something that made her freeze in place. It was a sound she had never heard before but somehow recognized as danger. It was a low, rumbling growl, followed by another, and then another. Wolves. Lucy May had seen wolves from a distance a few times during her weeks in the wilderness, but they had always avoided her. She knew they were dangerous, especially in groups, but she also knew they usually didn't attack unless they were very hungry or protecting their young. The growling was coming from somewhere in the canyon below her. Mixed with the wolf sounds, she could hear something else. It sounded like a horse in distress, whinnying and stamping, and underneath that, she thought she heard a human voice, though she couldn't make out any words. Every instinct told her to run back to her cave as fast as possible. Wolves were nothing to play with, and whatever was happening in that canyon was none of her business. But something held her back. Maybe it was the memory of all those times in Cedar Point when people had walked away from her when she needed help. Maybe it was simple curiosity. Or maybe it was something deeper than that. Moving as quietly as she could, Lucy May crept toward the edge of the canyon and looked down. What she saw made her heart race with fear and something else she couldn't quite name. About 30 feet below her, a man was trapped beneath a horse that had apparently fallen and couldn't get back up. The horse was clearly injured, thrashing weakly and making sounds of pain. But that wasn't the worst part. Surrounding both the man and the horse were 5 gray wolves, circling slowly and getting closer with each pass. The man was trying to push the horse off his legs, but he wasn't strong enough. Lucy May could see that he was hurt too. There was blood on his forehead and his movements were slow and pained. He was also clearly not from any settlement she knew about. His clothes were different, made of leather and decorated with beads and feathers. His long black hair was braided with strips of fur and colored cloth. Lucy May had heard stories about the Comanche people who lived in this part of Texas. The adults in Cedar Point spoke about them in hushed, fearful voices. They said the Comanche were dangerous warriors who could ride horses like they were born on them, and could track a man across miles of empty land. But looking down at this trapped man, Lucy May didn't see a dangerous warrior. She saw someone in trouble, just like she had been in trouble so many times, and the wolves were getting closer. The largest wolf, probably the pack leader, was now only a few feet away from the man's head. Its yellow eyes were fixed on him, and Lucy May could see its muscles tensing, preparing to attack. The man had stopped struggling and was lying very still, probably hoping the wolves would lose interest and go away. But Lucy May could tell that wasn't going to happen. She had to make a choice, and she had to make it fast. She could climb back from the edge and run away, leaving the man to whatever fate awaited him. It would be the safe thing to do, the smart thing to do. Or she could try to help, even though she was just a 12-year-old girl with no weapons except her father's pocket knife. The largest wolf took another step forward, and Lucy May saw its lips pull back to show sharp white teeth. That made the decision for her. She had learned a lot about animals during her time in the wilderness, and one thing she knew was that most animals, even predators, were afraid of fire. She also knew that wolves had excellent hearing and could be startled by sudden, loud noises. Lucy May quickly gathered all the dry grass and twigs she could find near the canyon edge. Her hands were shaking, but she managed to get her flint and steel working and soon had a small fire burning. She fed it carefully, making it bigger and brighter. And then she found the longest, straightest stick she could reach. Wrapping one end of the stick with dry grass, she held it in the fire until it caught and blazed up. Now she had a torch, though it wouldn't last very long. She needed to work fast. Taking the deepest breath she could manage, Lucy May stood up at the edge of the canyon and began shouting as loud as she could. She screamed and yelled and made every noise she could think of. At the same time, she waved her burning torch back and forth, making the flames dance and flicker. The effect was immediate. The wolves spun around to look up at her, their ears laid back and their eyes wide with surprise. She could see them trying to decide if this new threat was more dangerous than the meal they had been preparing to enjoy. Lucy May kept shouting and waving her torch, even though her throat was getting sore and her arm was getting tired. She also started throwing rocks down into the canyon, not trying to hit the wolves, but aiming near them to make more noise and confusion. For a few heart-stopping moments, the wolves just stood there looking back and forth between her and the trapped man. Then the pack leader made a decision. With a sharp bark that seemed to be a signal to the others, he turned and trotted away from the man and horse. The other wolves followed, casting nervous glances back at the strange, noisy, fire-wielding creature above them. Lucy May didn't stop her noise and fire-waving until the last wolf had disappeared around a bend in the canyon. Only then did she allow herself to collapse at the canyon edge, breathing hard and shaking all over. She had done it. She had actually scared away a pack of wolves, but her work wasn't finished. The man below was still trapped under his horse, and from what she could see, both of them needed help. The question was, how could she get down there and what would happen when she did? She had just saved a Comanche warrior's life, but that didn't mean he would be grateful. For all she knew, he might consider her as much of an enemy as the wolves had been. Looking down at him, she saw that he had managed to turn his head and was staring up at her. Even from this distance, she could see the surprise in his dark eyes. He had probably never seen anything like what had just happened. A wild-looking white girl appearing out of nowhere, scaring off wolves with fire and noise. Lucy May knew she had crossed a line from which there was no going back. She had involved herself in something much bigger and more dangerous than anything she had faced in her short life. But she had also discovered something about herself that she hadn't known before. When someone needed help, even a stranger, even someone her people considered an enemy, she couldn't just walk away. The question now was, what would happen next? And whether the choice she had just made would save 2 lives or cost her the one life she had worked so hard to preserve. Getting down into the canyon proved to be almost as dangerous as facing the wolves had been. Lucy May had to climb down a rocky slope that was steep and covered with loose stones that shifted under her feet. More than once, she nearly lost her grip and almost fell the rest of the way down, but she made it to the bottom with nothing worse than scraped hands and a few new holes in her already worn clothes. The Comanche warrior watched her approach with eyes that showed both caution and curiosity. He hadn't moved much since the wolves left, and Lucy May could see that his situation was more serious than she had first thought. His horse, a beautiful paint mare with brown and white markings, had fallen in such a way that both of the man's legs were pinned underneath her body. The horse was still alive but clearly in great pain. Her breathing was shallow and fast, and there was blood coming from a gash on her side. Lucy May could see that one of the horse's legs was bent at an unnatural angle. She had seen enough injured animals to know that the horse's leg was badly broken. The man spoke to her in a language she didn't understand, but his tone was not threatening. If anything, he sounded tired and maybe a little grateful. His face was weathered and strong, with high cheekbones and deep-set dark eyes. Lucy May guessed he was probably around her father's age, maybe 35 or 40 years old. Lucy May approached slowly, keeping her hands visible so he could see she wasn't carrying any weapons. When she got close enough, she could see that he was hurt worse than she had thought. Besides the cut on his forehead, there was blood on his shirt, and his face was pale in a way that suggested he had lost quite a bit of blood. She pointed to herself and said, "Lucy May," hoping he would understand that she was telling him her name. Then she pointed to him and raised her eyebrows, asking for his name in return. He studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether he could trust her. Finally, he tapped his chest and said something that sounded like, "Spotted Eagle." At least that's what Lucy May thought he said. The words were different from any language she had ever heard, but she tried to repeat them back to him. A ghost of a smile crossed his face when she attempted to say his name, probably because her pronunciation was terrible, but the fact that she was trying seemed to mean something to him. Lucy May knelt down next to the horse and gently placed her hand on the animal's neck. The mare's skin was hot and damp with sweat, and Lucy May could feel her heart beating much too fast. She had helped injured animals before, but never anything this large or this badly hurt. She looked at Spotted Eagle and shook her head sadly, then drew her finger across her throat. She hated to be the one to tell him, but the horse was not going to survive. The broken leg, the loss of blood, and the shock of the fall had been too much for her. Spotted Eagle's face showed that he understood what she was trying to tell him. He closed his eyes for a moment and said something in his own language that sounded like a prayer or a goodbye. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet with tears, but his voice was steady when he spoke. Lucy May couldn't understand his words, but she understood his meaning. He was asking her to help him end the horse's suffering. It was something that had to be done, but it wasn't easy for either of them. Lucy May had her father's pocket knife, but it was too small for a job like this. Looking around the canyon floor, she found a large, sharp rock that would work better. She showed it to Spotted Eagle, and he nodded his approval. What happened next was quick and merciful. Lucy May had learned from watching hunters in Cedar Point that there was a way to do this that would cause the least pain. The horse was suffering, and ending that suffering was an act of kindness, even though it was also sad. When it was over, Spotted Eagle spoke a few more words in his language, and Lucy May bowed her head respectfully. She might not have understood his words, but she understood that he was honoring his horse's spirit and thanking her for helping to end the animal's pain. Now came the harder part. With the horse no longer moving or struggling, Lucy May could see that Spotted Eagle's legs were pinned under the animal's body, but they didn't appear to be broken. The problem was that the horse was simply too heavy for either of them to move alone. Lucy May walked around the horse's body, studying the situation from different angles. She had learned about levers and simple machines from watching the men in Cedar Point move heavy logs and rocks. If she could find the right spot and the right tool, she might be able to shift the horse's weight just enough for Spotted Eagle to pull his legs free. She found a long, straight branch that had fallen from one of the trees above the canyon. It was thick enough to be strong, but not so thick that she couldn't handle it. She also found a smaller rock that could serve as a fulcrum. Spotted Eagle watched with interest as she set up her simple lever system. He seemed to understand what she was trying to do, and he positioned himself to pull his legs out as soon as she could lift the horse's weight off of them. Lucy May put all of her strength into pushing down on the long end of the branch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, very slowly, the horse's body shifted just a few inches. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Spotted Eagle gritted his teeth and pulled himself backward, sliding his legs out from under the horse. As soon as he was clear, Lucy May let go of the branch and rushed over to help him. Both of his legs were badly bruised and swollen, but as far as she could tell, nothing was broken. He tried to stand up, but immediately sat back down with a sharp intake of breath. His legs had been pinned for too long and would need time to get their feeling and strength back. Lucy May helped him move to a more comfortable spot where he could lean against a large boulder. Then she went to the small spring she had noticed earlier and brought back water in her hands for him to drink. The water was cold and clean, and she could see that it helped him feel a little better. As the afternoon wore on, Lucy May realized that Spotted Eagle was not going to be able to travel for a while. His legs were getting more swollen, not less, and he was obviously in considerable pain. She also noticed that the cut on his head was deeper than she had first thought, and he was showing signs of what she recognized as a head injury. Sometimes he would seem confused about where he was or what had happened. Other times he would try to get up and walk, forgetting that his legs couldn't support him yet. Lucy May had seen similar behavior in a man back in Cedar Point who had been kicked by a horse. As the sun began to set, Lucy May made a decision that surprised even her. She was going to stay in the canyon and take care of Spotted Eagle until he was well enough to travel. It was dangerous for both of them. If other Comanche warriors came looking for him, they might not be as grateful for her help as he seemed to be. And if people from Cedar Point somehow found them together, they would assume the worst. But Lucy May had learned something important during her weeks alone in the wilderness. Sometimes the right thing to do and the safe thing to do were not the same thing. And she had also learned that she was stronger and more capable than she had ever imagined. She gathered wood and built a small fire near where Spotted Eagle was resting. The warmth felt good as the night air grew cooler, and the light would help keep any wild animals away. She also used some of the mint she had gathered earlier to make a tea that would help with his pain and might reduce the swelling in his legs. Spotted Eagle accepted the tea gratefully and seemed to understand that she was planning to stay and help him. He spoke to her in his language, and although she couldn't understand the words, his tone was clearly one of gratitude and respect. As they sat by the fire together, Lucy May realized that this was the first time in many months that she didn't feel completely alone. Yes, they couldn't really communicate with words, and yes, their people were supposed to be enemies. But somehow, in this quiet canyon with the stars appearing overhead, none of that seemed to matter as much as the simple fact that they were two human beings who had helped each other. When help was needed, she had no idea that this night would be the beginning of a friendship that would change both of their lives, in ways neither of them could possibly imagine. The next morning brought both hope and new challenges. Spotted Eagle's legs were still swollen and painful, but he could move them more easily than he had the night before. The confusion from his head injury was also clearing up, though Lucy May noticed he still moved carefully and seemed to get tired more quickly than normal. Lucy May woke up before dawn, as had become her habit during her weeks in the wilderness. She quietly rebuilt their fire and went to check the simple trap she had set up the evening before. To her delight, she found a fat rabbit in one of them. It would provide good, nourishing food for both of them. When she returned to their camp with the rabbit, she found Spotted Eagle awake and sitting up. He was examining her traps with obvious interest, turning one of them over in his hands and studying how she had constructed it. When he saw her approaching with the rabbit, his eyebrows went up in a look of respect and surprise. He said something in his language that sounded approving, and then he made gestures that seemed to be asking how the trap worked. Lucy May was happy to show him. She had learned to make traps by watching how water and debris naturally collected in certain spots along the creek, and then figuring out how to recreate that effect on purpose. As she demonstrated the trap's mechanism, pointing to different parts and explaining in English how they worked, Spotted Eagle nodded and made comments in his own language, even though they couldn't understand each other's words. It was clear that they were both learning something new. After they had shared the roasted rabbit for breakfast, Spotted Eagle surprised Lucy May by producing a small leather pouch from inside his shirt. From the pouch, he took out what looked like dried meat. But when Lucy May tasted it, she discovered it was unlike anything she had ever eaten before. The meat was incredibly flavorful, and seemed to give her energy almost immediately. It was also mixed with what tasted like berries and perhaps nuts, all combined into a portable food that would keep for a long time without spoiling. Spotted Eagle seemed pleased by her obvious enjoyment of the food. He pointed to the dried meat and said a word that sounded like pemmican. Then he pointed to himself and made gestures that seemed to indicate this was something his people made. Lucy May tried to repeat the word, and again, her poor pronunciation seemed to amuse him. Over the next several days, as Spotted Eagle's strength gradually returned, they developed their own system of communication. It was part English words that Lucy May taught him, part Comanche words that he taught her, and part gestures and drawings in the dirt that they both could understand. Lucy May learned that Spotted Eagle's name in his language meant something like the eagle that has spots on its wings. He was apparently someone important in his tribe, though she didn't fully understand what his role was. She got the impression that he was both a warrior and someone who made important decisions for his people. Spotted Eagle, in turn, learned about Lucy May's life as an orphan and her decision to leave Cedar Point. She drew pictures in the dirt to show him the settlement, the people who had been unkind to her, and her small cave by the waterfall. His face grew serious as he began to understand how difficult her life had been. On the third day, when Spotted Eagle was finally able to stand and walk a little, he began teaching Lucy May things about survival that she had never imagined. He showed her how to read animal tracks, not just to know what kind of animal had passed by, but to know how long ago, whether the animal was healthy or sick, and even what the animal had been eating. He also taught her about plants in ways that amazed her. Lucy May had learned to identify edible berries and roots, but Spotted Eagle knew plants that could be used for medicine, for making tools, and even for starting fires in wet weather. He showed her a particular type of bark that could be chewed to help with pain, and leaves that could be crushed and applied to cuts to help them heal faster. Most impressive of all, he began teaching her how to move through the forest the way his people did. Lucy May had thought she was pretty good at moving quietly, but compared to Spotted Eagle, she sounded like a herd of buffalo crashing through the woods. He showed her how to place her feet so that they wouldn't snap twigs or rustle leaves. He taught her to move with the natural rhythm of the forest, pausing when the birds paused, moving when the wind moved through the trees. Within just a few days of practice, Lucy May found that she could get much closer to wild animals before they noticed her presence. In return, Lucy May shared her own knowledge with Spotted Eagle. She showed him the cave where she had been living and helped him understand how she had survived on her own for so long. He was particularly interested in her methods for preserving food and her techniques for finding water in areas where no streams or springs were visible. Lucy May had learned to find water by watching where certain plants grew, by noticing how morning dew collected in different places, and by following the flight patterns of birds in the early morning and evening. Spotted Eagle already knew some of these techniques, but others were new to him. As they spent more time together, Lucy May began to realize that everything she had been told about the Comanche people was either completely wrong or greatly exaggerated. Spotted Eagle was not the savage warrior that the people in Cedar Point had described. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and had a deep knowledge of the natural world that impressed her more each day. He was also kind in ways that surprised her. When he noticed that her clothes were getting more torn and ragged, he used some of the leather fringe from his own shirt to help her patch them. When she cut her hand on a sharp rock, he immediately knew which plants to use to clean the wound and help it heal. Most importantly, he treated her with respect. He listened to her ideas about survival techniques even though she was just a young girl. He thanked her when she shared food or helped him with something. He never made her feel like a burden or an inconvenience, even though caring for him had certainly made her own survival more difficult. By the end of the first week, Lucy May realized that she had learned more about living in the wilderness in those few days than she had learned in all her previous weeks alone. But more than that, she had remembered what it felt like to have a friend. Spotted Eagle seemed to be having similar thoughts. Lucy May could tell that he was growing stronger and would soon be able to travel back to wherever his people were camped. But instead of seeming eager to leave, he appeared to be thinking deeply about something that was troubling him. One evening, as they sat by their fire, Spotted Eagle drew a picture in the dirt that showed two groups of people facing each other across a line. Then he pointed to himself, to her, and back to the picture. Lucy May understood that he was thinking about the fact that their people were enemies, and wondering what that meant for the friendship they had developed. Lucy May thought about this for a long time before responding. Finally, she drew her own picture in the dirt. It showed two people sitting by a fire, sharing food and helping each other. Then she pointed to the picture, to herself, to him, and then to her heart. What she was trying to say was that whatever their people might think about each other, what mattered to her was what had happened between the two of them. He had accepted her help when he needed it, and he had shared his knowledge with her when she could use it. That made them friends, regardless of what anyone else might think. Spotted Eagle studied her drawing for a long time, and Lucy May could see that he was struggling with a difficult decision. She didn't know what he was thinking, but she sensed that whatever choice he made would change both of their lives in ways they couldn't predict. When he finally looked up at her, his expression was serious but determined. He spoke a few words in his language that she didn't understand, but his tone suggested that he had made up his mind about something important. Lucy May had no way of knowing that Spotted Eagle had just decided to do something that no Comanche warrior had ever done before. He was going to invite a white person to join his tribe, not as a captive but as a friend and an equal. It was a decision that would test the limits of his people's tolerance and his own standing within the tribe. But it was also a decision that felt right to him. This strange, brave girl had saved his life and had shown him kindness when she had no reason to do so. In return, he wanted to offer her something that no white person had ever been offered before: a true place among the Comanche people. On the 8th morning since the wolf attack, Spotted Eagle woke up feeling stronger than he had since his accident. His legs no longer caused him constant pain, and the confusion from his head injury had completely cleared. As he stood up and walked around their small camp, Lucy May could see that he was almost back to his normal strength. She felt happy for him, but also sad. She knew this meant he would soon be leaving to return to his people, and she would be alone again. The past week had been the happiest time she could remember since before her parents died. Having someone to talk to, even in their mixed-up language of gestures and broken words, had made her feel human again. Spotted Eagle seemed to sense her sadness, because he sat down next to her by the fire and began to speak in a serious tone. He used some English words he had learned from her, mixed with his own language and gestures to help her understand what he was trying to say. From what Lucy May could piece together, he was telling her about his tribe. He drew pictures in the dirt showing many lodges arranged in a circle, with horses grazing nearby and children playing in the center. He pointed to himself and then to one of the larger lodges, indicating that he held an important position among his people. Then Spotted Eagle did something that completely surprised Lucy May. He drew another figure in the dirt next to his own, clearly meant to represent her. He pointed to this figure, then to her, then to the drawing of the village. He was asking her to come with him. Lucy May stared at the drawings, hardly believing what she was seeing. A Comanche warrior was inviting her to join his tribe. It was something she had never imagined possible. Everything she had been taught told her that the Comanche were dangerous enemies who would never accept a white person among them. But as she looked at Spotted Eagle's earnest face, she realized that everything she had been taught about his people was probably as wrong as what his people had been taught about hers. This man had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. If he was willing to vouch for her with his tribe, maybe there was a chance they would accept her. Spotted Eagle could see the uncertainty in her eyes, so he began to explain more about what life with his people would be like. He told her about the women who would teach her new skills, the children who would become her friends, and the elders who had wisdom about plants and animals that would amaze her. He also tried to make her understand that joining his tribe would not be easy. There would be people who would not trust her at first because of her skin color and her background. She would have to prove herself worthy of their acceptance, but he promised that he would help her and protect her while she learned their ways. Lucy May thought about her alternatives. She could return to her cave and continue living alone in the wilderness. She had proven that she could survive that way, but it was a hard and lonely life. Or she could try to return to Cedar Point or find another white settlement. But she knew she would face the same problems she had encountered before. The idea of joining Spotted Eagle's tribe was frightening, but it was also exciting. These people lived in harmony with the natural world in ways that the white settlers never had. They had knowledge about plants, animals, and survival that went back hundreds of years. And most importantly, Spotted Eagle had made it clear that they valued things like courage, kindness, and skill rather than just what color someone's skin happened to be. After thinking for a long time, Lucy May pointed to herself, then to Spotted Eagle, then to his drawing of the village. She was saying yes. Spotted Eagle's face broke into the first big smile she had seen from him since they met. He clasped her hand in both of his and spoke rapidly in his own language. She couldn't understand the words, but his tone made it clear that he was pleased and excited by her decision. But then his expression grew serious again, and he began to explain some of the challenges they would face. From what Lucy May could understand, bringing her to the tribe would be unusual and controversial. Some people would be suspicious of her motives. Others would be angry that he had revealed the location of their camp to an outsider. Spotted Eagle would have to convince the tribal council that Lucy May was trustworthy and that she could contribute something valuable to the tribe. He would have to tell them about how she had saved his life, about her survival skills, and about her character. But ultimately the decision would be up to the council and the chief. He also tried to prepare her for what the journey to his tribe's camp would be like. It would take them 3 days of walking through difficult terrain. They would have to be careful to avoid areas where white settlers might see them together, as that could be dangerous for both of them. Lucy May nodded to show that she understood. She had been living in dangerous circumstances for months now, and she was not afraid of a little more danger if it meant the chance for a better life. They spent the rest of that day preparing for the journey. Lucy May gathered all of her possessions, which didn't take long since she owned so little. Spotted Eagle helped her create a more efficient pack using some leather strips from his clothing and showed her how to carry it in a way that wouldn't tire her out during the long walk. He also began teaching her some basic words and phrases in his language that she would need to know when they reached the camp. Words for friend or peace, thank you, and I am grateful. Lucy May practiced these over and over, knowing that being able to speak even a few words of Comanche might help make a good first impression. That evening, as they sat by their fire for what might be the last time, Spotted Eagle told Lucy May more about his people's customs and beliefs. He explained that the Comanche respected courage above almost everything else, and that her rescue of him from the wolves would be seen as a brave act worthy of honor. He also told her that his people believed the natural world was full of spirits, and that everything in nature had its own power and purpose. Animals, plants, rocks, and streams all had lessons to teach those who knew how to listen. Lucy May found these ideas fascinating and very different from what she had been taught in Cedar Point. As the night grew late, Spotted Eagle shared one more important piece of information with Lucy May. He told her that if the tribal council accepted her, she would be given a new name in the Comanche language. Her old name and her old life would be left behind, and she would truly become one of his people. The idea of having a new name felt both scary and exciting to Lucy May. She had been Lucy May for 12 years, but that name was connected to a lot of pain and sadness. Maybe having a new name would give her a chance to become a new person, someone stronger and braver than the frightened orphan girl she had been. The next morning, they broke camp early and began their journey toward the Comanche village. As they walked away from the canyon where they had spent the past week together, Lucy May felt like she was walking away from her old life and toward something completely unknown. She had no idea what waited for her at the end of their 3-day journey. She didn't know if Spotted Eagle's people would accept her or reject her. She didn't know if she would be able to learn their ways or if she would disappoint them and be sent away. But for the first time in many months, Lucy May felt hopeful about the future. Whatever happened, she would face it with a friend by her side, and with the knowledge that she was stronger and more capable than she had ever imagined. The scared, hungry orphan girl was gone. In her place was someone ready to embrace whatever adventures lay ahead. As they walked through the forest together, Spotted Eagle began teaching her the names of things in his language. Trees, rocks, birds, clouds. Everything had a name, and many of those names told stories about the thing they described. Lucy May listened carefully and repeated each word, knowing that she was learning more than just vocabulary. She was beginning to learn how to see the world through Comanche eyes. The journey to her new life had begun. The Comanche village was unlike anything Lucy May had ever seen or imagined. As she and Spotted Eagle crested the final hill of their 3-day journey, She stopped in amazement at the sight spread out before her. Dozens of cone-shaped lodges made of buffalo hides stretched across a wide meadow beside a clear, fast-running stream. Horses grazed peacefully in large herds, their coats shining in the morning sunlight. Children played games between the lodges, while women worked at various tasks around small fires. Men sat in groups working on weapons and tools or simply talking. Everyone moved with a sense of purpose and belonging that Lucy May had never witnessed in any white settlement. But as soon as the people in the village noticed her and Spotted Eagle approaching, everything changed. The children stopped playing and stared. The women put down their work and gathered in small groups, whispering among themselves. The men stood up and moved closer, their faces serious and questioning. Spotted Eagle had warned Lucy May that this moment would be difficult. His people had never seen a white child walking freely into their village as a friend rather than as a captive. Many of them had lost family members in conflicts with white settlers, and all of them had heard terrible stories about what white people did to Comanche prisoners. Spotted Eagle spoke loudly in his own language, addressing the crowd that was gathering around them. Lucy May could hear her name mentioned several times, along with words she had learned during their journey. She heard him say wolf and fire and brave, and she guessed that he was telling them the story of how she had saved his life. An older man with gray hair and many feathers in his headdress stepped forward. Lucy May could tell from the way others deferred to him that he was the chief. He looked at her with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her. When he spoke, his voice was deep and commanding. Spotted Eagle replied respectfully, and Lucy May could tell that they were having an important conversation about her. Other people began to join in, and she could hear the tone of the discussion growing more heated. Some voices sounded angry, while others seemed more curious or sympathetic. After what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, the chief held up his hand for silence. He spoke directly to Lucy May, using words she didn't understand but in a tone that wasn't threatening. Then he gestured for her to follow him. The chief led Lucy May and Spotted Eagle to the center of the village, where a large fire was burning. Many people gathered around in a circle, and Lucy May realized that she was about to face some kind of formal questioning or judgment. What followed was the most frightening and important conversation of Lucy May's life. The chief asked her questions through Spotted Eagle, who translated as best he could. They wanted to know why she had helped their warrior. They wanted to know if she was a spy sent by white settlers. They wanted to know if she could be trusted not to reveal the location of their village. Lucy May answered as honestly as she could, using the Comanche words she had learned and relying on Spotted Eagle to help with the rest. She told them about her parents' death, about her life as an orphan, and about her decision to leave the white settlement. She explained that she had helped Spotted Eagle because it was the right thing to do, not because she expected any reward. Most importantly, she tried to make them understand that she had nowhere else to go. The white settlements didn't want her, and she couldn't survive indefinitely on her own in the wilderness. She was asking them to give her a chance to prove that she could be a valuable member of their community. The discussion among the tribal council went on for most of the day. Sometimes they would send Lucy May away while they talked privately. Other times they would call her back to ask more questions. Through it all, Spotted Eagle stayed by her side, speaking on her behalf and vouching for her character. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, the chief announced his decision. Lucy May couldn't understand all of his words, but she could tell from Spotted Eagle's relieved expression that the news was good. She would be allowed to stay, but with conditions. She would be placed in the care of one of the tribal elders, an elderly woman named Grandmother Willow, who would teach her the proper ways to behave in Comanche society. She would have to prove herself useful to the tribe through her work and her skills, and most importantly, she would have to show that she could keep the tribe's secrets and could be trusted completely. If she failed in any of these requirements, or if she caused any trouble for the tribe, she would be banished immediately. Given the dangerous territory they lived in, banishment would probably mean death. The chief wanted to make sure she understood the seriousness of the commitment she was making. Lucy May nodded solemnly to show that she understood. Then in her carefully practiced Comanche, she said the words Spotted Eagle had taught her. "I am grateful. I will not disappoint you." A murmur went through the crowd at hearing her speak their language, and Lucy May thought she saw a few approving nods. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Grandmother Willow turned out to be a small, wrinkled woman with bright, intelligent eyes and hands that were never still. She led Lucy May to a lodge near the edge of the village and showed her where she would be sleeping. The lodge was warm and comfortable, with soft buffalo robes for bedding and a small fire pit in the center. That first night, Grandmother Willow began Lucy May's education in Comanche customs. She taught her how to sit properly, how to show respect to elders, and how to behave around the men of the tribe. Many of these customs were very different from what Lucy May had learned in white society, and she had to concentrate hard to remember them all. The next morning, her real education began. Grandmother Willow woke her before dawn and immediately put her to work helping with the morning meal. Lucy May learned how to prepare corn in ways she had never seen before, grinding it into meal and mixing it with berries and meat to make a nutritious porridge. But cooking was just the beginning. Over the following days and weeks, Grandmother Willow taught Lucy May dozens of skills that Comanche women needed to know. She learned how to tan buffalo hides to make them soft and waterproof. She learned how to sew with sinew and bone needles, creating clothing that was both beautiful and practical. Most fascinating of all, she began to learn about plants and their uses. Grandmother Willow knew more about the healing properties of plants than anyone Lucy May had ever met. She could identify hundreds of different plants and knew exactly how to prepare them for different purposes. Some plants could reduce fever. Others could help heal wounds or ease the pain of childbirth. Still others could be used to make dyes for clothing or to preserve food for long journeys. Each plant had its own season for gathering, its own method of preparation, and its own specific uses. Lucy May proved to be an eager and talented student. Her experience living alone in the wilderness had already taught her to pay close attention to plants and their properties. Now, with Grandmother Willow's guidance, she began to understand the deeper knowledge that had been passed down through generations of Comanche women. Grandmother Willow was impressed by how quickly Lucy May learned and by how respectfully she approached the sacred knowledge she was being taught. Many of the plant remedies were considered sacred by the Comanche, and sharing them with an outsider was not something that was done lightly. As the weeks passed, Lucy May began to feel more at home in the village. The other women gradually accepted her presence, especially when they saw how hard she worked and how eagerly she learned. The children, who had been shy at first, began to include her in their games and to help her practice speaking Comanche. Most importantly, Grandmother Willow began to trust her with more and more important knowledge. She taught Lucy May about the spiritual significance of the plants they gathered, explaining that each one was a gift from the earth that should be used with gratitude and respect. She also began teaching Lucy May about the special recipes that were used for important ceremonies and celebrations. These recipes were different from everyday food preparation. They required specific ingredients gathered at specific times, prepared in exact ways, and often combined with prayers and rituals. Lucy May learned to make the special corn cakes that were eaten during the spring ceremony to welcome the return of the buffalo. She learned how to prepare the herbal teas that were given to young men before they went on their first hunting expeditions. She learned about the sacred foods that were offered to the spirits during times of illness or drought. Each recipe came with its own story and its own significance. Grandmother Willow explained that these recipes were not just about feeding the body, but about maintaining the spiritual health of the entire tribe. They connected the people to their ancestors, to the natural world, and to the spirits that watched over them. As Lucy May's knowledge grew, so did her understanding of how different Comanche society was from the white settlements she had known. Everything was connected: the food they ate, the clothes they wore, the ceremonies they performed, and the way they treated the land and animals around them. By the end of her third month in the village, Lucy May had learned more than 40 different plant-based recipes and remedies. But more than that, she had begun to understand the wisdom and complexity of. As autumn approached during Lucy May's first year with the Comanche, Grandmother Willow made a decision that would transform the young woman's life forever. She had been watching Lucy May carefully for months, observing not just her skills but her character. What she saw convinced her that Lucy May was ready for a responsibility that had never been given to someone born outside the tribe. The decision came during the season when the women gathered to preserve food for winter. Lucy May had become known throughout the village for her remarkable memory and her gentle touch with plants. She could remember complex recipes after hearing them just once, and she had an intuitive understanding of how different plants work together to create healing remedies. One evening, as they sat by the fire working on winter preparations, Grandmother Willow spoke to Lucy May in a serious tone. "Little sister," she said, using the name the tribe had given Lucy May, "there is something important I must tell you." Grandmother Willow explained that she was getting old, and that her memory was not as sharp as it once had been. More importantly, she was concerned about what would happen to the sacred knowledge she carried when she passed on to the spirit world. Her own daughters had died in conflicts with white settlers years before, and there was no one else in the tribe who had shown the same aptitude for this work that Lucy May had demonstrated. "Our people's knowledge of plants and healing must not be lost," Grandmother Willow said. "For hundreds of years, this wisdom has been passed from grandmother to granddaughter. Now I believe the spirits have brought you to us for this purpose." What Grandmother Willow was proposing was unprecedented. She wanted to teach Lucy May not just the common remedies that many women knew, but the complete collection of sacred recipes that were known only to the tribe's medicine women. These included remedies for serious illnesses, ceremonial foods for the most important rituals, and secret preparations that were used only in times of great crisis. Lucy May was overwhelmed by the honor being offered to her, but she was also frightened by the responsibility. These recipes were not just medical knowledge. They were part of the spiritual foundation of the tribe. If she made mistakes or forgot important details, people could die, or sacred ceremonies could be ruined. Grandmother Willow seemed to understand her fears. "I have watched you, little sister," she said gently. "You do not just learn with your mind. You learn with your heart. The plants speak to you in ways they speak to few people. This is a gift from the spirits, and it must not be wasted." Over the following months, Lucy May's education entered a new phase. Instead of learning alongside other women, she began spending most of her time alone with Grandmother Willow, receiving intensive instruction in the most sacred and secret knowledge of the tribe. She learned about plants that could heal wounds that would otherwise be fatal. She learned recipes for remedies that could ease the passing of someone who was dying, and others that could help women who were having difficulty in childbirth. She learned about ceremonial foods that were prepared only for the most important spiritual celebrations of the year. Each recipe came with detailed instructions not just about ingredients and preparation, but about the proper mindset and spiritual preparation required of the person making it. Some remedies had to be prepared while fasting. Others required specific prayers or songs to be sung during the preparation process. Still others could only be made during certain phases of the moon, or at particular times of the year. Lucy May proved to be an exceptional student. Her memory was indeed remarkable, but more than that, she seemed to understand intuitively why certain combinations of plants worked together. She could often predict what effect a particular mixture would have before Grandmother Willow told her. As winter deepened, Lucy May realized that she needed a way to preserve this knowledge beyond just her memory. The amount of information was enormous, and she was terrified of forgetting some crucial detail that could mean the difference between life and death for someone who needed help. With Grandmother Willow's permission, Lucy May began keeping a secret record of everything she was learning. She created her own system of writing that combined English letters with Comanche symbols and her own invented codes. She wrote on pieces of bark and hide that she could easily conceal, creating a hidden library of sacred knowledge. The writing was painstaking work that she could only do in private, usually late at night by the light of the fire when everyone else was asleep. She had to be extremely careful because revealing sacred knowledge to outsiders was forbidden and could result in severe punishment, even for someone who had been accepted into the tribe. By the time spring returned, Lucy May had documented more than 60 different recipes and remedies. But Grandmother Willow was not finished with her education. As the weather warmed and new plants began to grow, she began teaching Lucy May about the most sacred knowledge of all, the recipes used in the tribe's most important spiritual ceremonies. These included the foods prepared for the sun dance, the remedies used during vision quests, and the special preparations given to warriors before important battles. Each of these recipes was considered so sacred that traditionally only the most senior medicine women were allowed to know them. Lucy May approached this final phase of her education with deep reverence and careful attention. She understood that she was being entrusted with knowledge that represented hundreds of years of accumulated wisdom. The responsibility was almost overwhelming, but she was determined to prove worthy of the trust being placed in her. As her knowledge expanded, so did her status within the tribe. People began coming to her directly for help with minor ailments, and she was invited to assist with more important healing ceremonies. The name Little Sister was gradually replaced by a new name, Plant Walker, in recognition of her special relationship with the plant world. But even as Lucy May gained respect and acceptance within the tribe, the outside world was changing in ways that would soon threaten everything she had learned to love. Tensions between white settlers and the Comanche were increasing. There were rumors of soldiers coming to force the tribe to move to a reservation far from their traditional lands. Spotted Eagle, who had become like an older brother to Lucy May, began spending more time away from the village on scouting expeditions. When he returned, his reports were increasingly worrying. White settlements were expanding rapidly, and conflicts between settlers and various Indian tribes were becoming more frequent and more violent. Grandmother Willow seemed to sense that difficult times were ahead. She began pushing Lucy May to learn faster, often working with her from dawn to dusk. "Time is short, little sister," she would say. "You must learn everything while you still can." By the end of Lucy May's second year with the tribe, she had documented 98 different sacred recipes and remedies. Each one was carefully recorded in her secret code, hidden away in a waterproof pouch that she kept with her at all times. Grandmother Willow was satisfied that she had passed on her knowledge to someone who would preserve it faithfully. But she was also worried about what would happen when the inevitable confrontation with the white world finally came. Would Lucy May be able to protect the sacred knowledge she now carried? Would she be able to use it to help her adopted people during the difficult times that lay ahead? As if in answer to these concerns, news came one day that would change everything. A large force of soldiers was marching toward their territory with orders to move all Comanche bands to a reservation in Indian Territory. The time of free life on the plains was coming to an end. Spotted Eagle called the tribal council together to discuss their options. They could fight, knowing they would probably be defeated. They could run, hoping to find refuge in Mexico, or they could surrender and accept life on the reservation. As the men debated these impossible choices, Lucy May sat with Grandmother Willow and realized that her education was about to take on a significance neither of them had fully anticipated. The sacred knowledge she had learned might be all that survived of the free Comanche way of life. Without knowing it, she had become the keeper of a treasure more valuable than gold, the accumulated wisdom of a people who were about to lose everything else they held dear. The question now was whether she would be able to preserve that treasure through the dark times that lay ahead. The soldiers came on a cold morning in March of 1864, just as the spring flowers were beginning to bloom. Lucy May, now known throughout the tribe as Plant Walker, was gathering early medicinal herbs with Grandmother Willow when they heard the sound of many horses approaching the village. They both knew immediately what it meant. Racing back to the camp, they found chaos. Families were hastily packing their belongings while the men prepared for what might be their final stand. The soldiers had surrounded the village and were demanding that all Comanche surrender immediately and prepare for relocation to the reservation. Spotted Eagle found Lucy May among the crowd of frightened people. His face was grim as he explained the situation. "They are giving us one day to decide," he said. "Fight and probably die, or surrender and lose everything we have ever known." That night, the tribal council met for the last time in their traditional homeland. The debate was passionate but brief. With women and children to protect and facing overwhelming military force, they had little choice but to surrender. The free life of the Comanche was ending. Grandmother Willow called Lucy May to her lodge that final night. The old woman's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. "Little sister," she said, "tomorrow we will go to a place where our old ways will be forbidden. They will try to make us forget who we are and where we came from. But you carry something they cannot take from us." She gestured to the hidden pouch where Lucy May kept her secret records. "You are no longer just Plant Walker of our tribe. You are now the keeper of our people's knowledge. This is a burden that may be heavier than you realize." Grandmother Willow explained that on the reservation, practicing traditional medicine would likely be forbidden. Speaking the Comanche language might be discouraged or even punished. The children would be sent to schools where they would be taught to be ashamed of their heritage. But knowledge that lives in the heart cannot be killed by laws, the old woman said. You must find a way to keep this wisdom alive, even if you cannot use it openly. Someday, when the world is ready, this knowledge may be the key to healing not just bodies but the spirit of our people. The next morning, the long march to the reservation began. Lucy May walked beside Grandmother Willow, watching as their village was dismantled and their horses were driven away. Everything she had learned to call home was disappearing behind them. Life on the reservation was everything Grandmother Willow had predicted and worse. The Comanche were crowded into a small area with insufficient food and poor shelter. Many of the traditional activities that had given their lives meaning were prohibited. Children were indeed taken away to schools where they were forbidden to speak their native language or practice their customs. Worst of all, illness was rampant. The crowded conditions, poor nutrition, and contaminated water led to outbreaks of diseases that devastated the population. Many of the elders, including Grandmother Willow, grew sick and weak. Lucy May found herself in an impossible situation. She had the knowledge to help many of the sick people, but using that knowledge openly would reveal that she possessed sacred information that the reservation authorities wanted to suppress. If she was discovered, she might be punished severely or even separated from the tribe entirely. Working in secret, Lucy May began using her knowledge to help where she could. She would gather plants during her supervised work assignments and prepare remedies in hidden locations. She shared these medicines quietly with people who needed them, always being careful not to reveal how much she actually knew. But her efforts could not save everyone. Grandmother Willow grew weaker each day, and by winter it was clear that she was dying. On her final night, she called Lucy May to her side one last time. I have one more gift to give you, the old woman whispered. Before I join the spirits, I want to make sure you know the most sacred recipe of all, the one that was passed down to me by my grandmother's grandmother, and to her by the medicine women before her. With her dying breath, Grandmother Willow shared the recipe for a healing mixture that was said to be able to cure almost any illness. It required ingredients that were nearly impossible to find, and a preparation process that took days to complete. But in the right hands, with the right spiritual preparation, it was said to work miracles. Lucy May carefully wrote down every detail of this final recipe, bringing her secret collection to exactly 98 sacred formulas. As Grandmother Willow passed away quietly that night, Lucy May realized that she was now the sole keeper of knowledge that represented centuries of accumulated wisdom. The years on the reservation were hard and full of loss. Spotted Eagle died in 1869, worn down by the hopelessness of reservation life. Many other friends and teachers passed away, taking with them memories and stories that could never be replaced. Lucy May watched as the Comanche way of life slowly withered away under the pressure of forced assimilation. But throughout these dark years, she continued to preserve the knowledge she had been entrusted with. She helped people whenever she could, always working in secret. She also began to realize that her unique position as someone who had lived in both worlds might eventually allow her to serve as a bridge between them. In 1875, Lucy May made the difficult decision to leave the reservation. The Comanche people she loved would always be in her heart, but she had begun to understand that the knowledge she carried might serve a greater purpose in the world beyond reservation boundaries. She settled in a small town in East Texas, where she presented herself as a woman who had learned about herbal medicine from her grandmother. Her knowledge of plants and healing quickly made her a respected figure in the community. People came to her from miles around seeking remedies for ailments that conventional medicine couldn't cure. For more than 20 years, Lucy May used her knowledge to help people while carefully guarding the secret of where that knowledge had come from. She never forgot that she was more than just a healer. She was the keeper of a sacred trust. As the new century approached and Lucy May entered her 60s, she began to worry about what would happen to the knowledge she carried when she died. She had never married or had children, and there was no one in her life who could serve as her successor. The answer came in 1898, when a young man named Daniel Morrison arrived in her town. He was an ethnographer from a university in the East, traveling through Texas to document the cultures and traditions of various Indian tribes before they disappeared entirely. Lucy May watched Morrison work for several weeks, observing how respectfully he treated the elderly people he interviewed and how carefully he recorded their stories. She could see that he understood the value of the knowledge he was collecting, and that he would treat it with the reverence it deserved. On a quiet evening in the fall of 1898, Lucy May invited Morrison to her home. Over the course of several hours, she told him her complete story, from her childhood as an orphan through her rescue of Spotted Eagle, her adoption by the Comanche, her training with Grandmother Willow, and her years as the secret keeper of sacred knowledge. Morrison listened with amazement as Lucy May showed him her hidden collection of 98 sacred recipes. She explained the significance of each one and the spiritual traditions that surrounded their use. She also made him understand the tremendous responsibility that came with possessing such knowledge. "This is not just information," she told him. "This is the living wisdom of a people who loved the earth and understood how to live in harmony with it. If this knowledge is lost, something precious will disappear from the world forever." Morrison promised to guard the recipes carefully and to use them only for scholarly purposes that would honor the memory of the Comanche people. He created multiple copies of Lucy May's records and placed them in university archives, where they would be preserved for future generations. Lucy May died peacefully in her sleep in January of 1899, satisfied that she had fulfilled the trust placed in her so many years before. The young orphan girl who had once risked her life to save a Comanche warrior from wolves had become the guardian of an entire culture's accumulated wisdom about healing and the natural world. The recipes she preserved would eventually contribute to modern understanding of plant-based medicine and would help scientists identify compounds that could be developed into life-saving drugs. But more than that, her story served as a testament to the possibility of understanding and respect between peoples who seemed destined to be enemies. In preserving those 98 sacred recipes, Lucy May had done more than save medical knowledge. She had saved a piece of the human spirit that recognized the deep connections between all living things. Her legacy lived on not just in the medicines that could heal bodies, but in the wisdom that could heal the divisions between people of different cultures and backgrounds. Years later, when Morrison published his ethnographic studies, he included Lucy May's story as an example of how knowledge and understanding could bridge even the deepest cultural divides. He wrote that she represented the best of both worlds, the courage and independence valued by white frontier society, and the wisdom and spiritual connection to nature that characterized Comanche culture.